feel quite so wobbly, you know.
Dip or sag anywhere.
That starts, in some people's cases, in their teens.
It just looked like you got boobs.
I'm just being a smart ass.
Yo, 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 what's going on, guys? You're listening to the MoreThanLifting podcast. I'm Reese.
And I'm Chris.
And today we're going to be talking about low-level drills and movement fundamentals, okay? So, first off, Chris, everything all right?
Yeah, everything's good, mate. Yeah, it's a bit of an up and down few days, but generally seeing the light now, so it's all good. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'm okay. Just been cracking on. So, low-level drills, movement fundamentals. We're talking about the basic movement processes and ways to think about your exercise with bodyweight exercise, because they're all mostly compound exercises. You're not doing just isolated like bicep curls or something like that. You're working multiple muscle groups or total body exercises and stuff like that. So it's not, you don't need to think of things like, oh, I'm doing arms today, oh, I'm doing back today, oh, I'm doing shoulders today, because you'll be doing them all in one exercise. Okay, so that's basically what we're going to be talking about. So the way I think about it, Chris, the way a lot of people in the calisthenics community especially think about it, is just breaking it into these fundamental movement types, which are push exercises when you're extending something, your limbs away from your body, pull exercises when you're bringing your extremities in, and then hold exercises where you're maintaining a static position, keeping solid. And so that's really it.
Yeah,
see you next week. I'll catch up with you.
Yeah, I mean, just to give everyone an idea, when we sort of transfer that over to the sort of strength and conditioning community, you have push, you have pull, you will have, hold, isometric based loading, but that tends to be a parameter set for most exercises, i.e. every exercise has an isometric position or capacity to it. So, holding a press up, holding a pull up, holding a squat, holding even a deadlift or a hinge position. But the sort of primary movement patterns we talk about there are very much push, pull, squat, hinge, carry, twist. Occasionally some people classify a lunge, like any sort of single leg movement. A step up is a lunge obviously is a lunge, a split squat is a lunge or a squat position, depending on your perspective. So there are a variety of different movement patterns, but I think for the purposes of today, we'll keep it to the very sort of raw fundamentals, as you said. So the push, pull, the iso holds, obviously very relevant to gymnastics, very specifically, because that's something way beyond normal training parameters, actually balancing yourself off the floor. It's not something you'd see people typically do in the gym. And we'll also look at some of the relevance of leg work, because I know something that does come up as a question around calisthenics and gymnastic strength a lot, and obviously it's a huge part of the strength and conditioning world is leg work, and how you can optimize that. And obviously if people are doing predominantly bodyweight based drills, then how do you maximize leg strength, leg coordination, leg power and drive? What does leg work look like in a gymnastics or a calisthenics setting? So maybe we can touch on that a little bit as well. But if you want to crack on with the upper body stuff, and then we can move into that a bit later.
Yeah. I think leg stuff can actually be really interesting with calisthenics, and I think it is confusing because before everything you think about with your legs is like basically just a form of squatting or lunging, like you're saying. And when you think about doing that as an exercise, you always got something in your hands. You know what I mean? People always have something in their hands or on their shoulders. But like I say, we'll talk about that in a minute. First off, we'll talk about the two movements as opposed to the hold, push and pull in, and these really are the fundamentals of movement. If you think about any kind of thing you do when in any form of life, you're either usually bringing something into your body or moving something away, not necessarily from the total extreme, from all the way over there to all the way in here, and vice versa. It's usually just little bits here and there, but your muscles are literally work around hinges, so they are the essential movements, bringing something in, moving something out. So when you're doing any exercise with calisthenics, it's good to have in your head to understand whether you're doing a pull movement or whether you're doing a push movement, because it's important to balance both of these parts of the equation. Otherwise, you're going to have one of your basic movement types is going to be really strong and the other one's going to be weak. and no one wants that. That's half of your body that's going to be out of balance with the other half of your body, and it's not going to be left and right, it's going to be your front and your back, which is a different way of looking at exercise, but to what is conventional, I guess, but that's the issue that you'll have if you don't focus on those things.
And we've all seen, you know, the guys who spend pretty much 90% of their time doing chest work, you know, benches, incline presses, pec flies, things like that, have very, what we call protracted shoulders, so very drawn in, rounded shoulders, you know, very tight pectoral, very tight anterior portion of their body, and obviously it's not being balanced out with the right ratios on the pulling side of things. Now, a lot of that comes down to very poor partial technique on a lot of exercises. You know, you'll see the bench barely even come down lower than, you know, maybe a couple of inches once they've lifted it off of a bench press, or, you know, their inclined dumbbell press is very short. You know, the pec flies are very minimal range, you know, so they're getting very tight in very specific areas, which create a very, as I say, protracted and kyphotic position with their body, i.e. they're rounded in their back. And given that a lot of people nowadays are very desk bound with their work, you know, most people assume a very kyphotic posture anyway, so they're very rounded already because they're spending all day hunched over a laptop. So you then go into the gym and pound away on the chest even harder and tighten up an already very tight area. And it's the same with abdominal flexion. So doing crunches, for example, it's why, you know, forward crunches or upper body flexion, you know, through the torso is kind of frowned upon quite a lot in strength conditioning world, because if you don't have a very strong posterior chain, if you don't have a very good neutral posture, then what you're going to find is that you're only compounding the tension in the muscles like the abdominals and the pectoral muscles and the anterior deltoids. They're going to cause you to round your back even more. So you go into the gym thinking you're moving around and ironing out some of the issues you've had from sitting down all day, but in fact you're potentially making it worse. And a lot of the time, thinking in a ratio of about 2-to-1 of back to front exercises, you know, it's a good start point. It's not the most accurate. You could probably say 1.5, and obviously if you're doing pressing work and static holds, particularly for the anterior portion of the body, just even something as simple as maybe a plank or, you know, a dynamic plank, which is a press up, then, you know, if you're doing those things correctly and with good range, that's a really healthy movement for the shoulder to go through. It causes scapular winging and retraction as well. So the scapular bones, the shoulder blades are opening up and moving around quite freely. The shoulder girdle, the shoulder joints moving very freely as well. So you're getting a good range of motion. So what's happening is those muscles and those joints through the press are getting opened up really, really well. So you don't have to go crazy with doing tons of back work to balance it out. However, if you do already have a very kyphotic, very anteriorly dominant postural position, then you're going to have to do a hell of a lot of pulling work to correct that first, and then try and maintain a pretty strong ratio thereafter. But yeah, just wanted to give you that little insight before we crack on.
No, that's really important. Like you're saying, it's like people are sitting slouching all day and then they go into the gym and training into the slouch rather than trying to counter it and work the other parts of your body that are being misaligned and are losing out from being in that position. So it's a really important thing to raise so that you understand the importance of it, and you grasp the concept as well that training isn't just to look good, that it's to fix your body. It's to give, not necessarily fix your body, but it's to
realign.
Realign and enable your body in the best way. Get your skeleton in the right place, because we're all out of shape. We're all out of place. Like well, I mean, there are probably a handful of athletes and stuff that really have perfect posture, but most people don't, and most people don't understand the importance of it either. It affects all kinds of things like your mood and stuff like that, and how your hormones balance in your body. And I mean, it's so important that it's not just about having a big chest. It's about
it's sometimes about having a big chest, but it's not always.
Sure, yeah, but that's a byproduct of working on your body as a whole, you know, as a unit. Because if you just have pecs, then you just look like you got boobs.
Yeah, true. Well, the thing is, it goes back to what we've talked about in prior couple of episodes, and what will continue to be a theme throughout every episode, I imagine. It's, you know, it's great to look good and it's great to want to look good, but you can look good and function well, you know, function fantastically well all at the same time. You know, it's possible, i.e. look at any gymnast out there. Look at how well their body functions, look how strong it is, and those can be classified as extremes. And then you'll hear stories about how gymnasts' bodies break down in later life and they have various issues and they can't sustain the intensity that they're working at in their teens and their 20s through to their 30s and 40s. And you're like, okay, fair enough, that's aging. Performance can likely diminish in most elite sports as people get older, whether it's football, basketball, tennis, golf, it doesn't really matter. Your performance can degrade over time, even with the best of intentions around your training. That's just the natural physiology we all have to kind of deal with as we get older. But the levels that we accept of degradation are just appalling. It's like, oh, I'm old. We gave the example. I think
I'm old. That's not an excuse. Are you kidding me?
Well, yeah, I think it was. I might have given this example already, but the idea of someone in their 50s who accepts they can't lift their arms above their head. It's the perfect example. It's like, well, I'm just getting older. It's like, no, you're not. You're just rubbish.
You're just forgetting. You're just forgetting. That's what it is. Your body's forgetting. Your joints are forgetting. Like your cells and your DNA's forgetting.
Yeah, and shockingly, that starts in some people's cases in their teens and into their 20s. I see guys in their 20s, who functionally are in awful shape, and it can be corrected. That's the great thing. The sooner you start, the easier it is to recorrect, and that's something that everyone should be encouraged by. But start sooner rather than later to give yourself the best opportunity, and also to enjoy the benefits of actually progressive training over time as well. Progressive effort, movement, just developing into a more natural, functional human being. And going back to what you said before, balance is probably the most powerful word you can use there. It gets overused a lot, but rebalancing your body, because it is all about ratios. Most injury, most ailment, most pain, most stress, it comes from imbalance in the body, whether it's a hormonal imbalance or a physiological balance. But when we're talking about musculature and connective tissue and skeletal function, then what we mean there is just trying to get the ratios correct, because that's where most, probably 99, if not 100% of injuries come from, is that you go to do something and something's too tight, or it's overly contracted, or it's not been warmed up appropriately, or there's too much torque in one part of the movement, one muscle, versus the requisite amount of flexibility in the other, and all of a sudden something snaps, something goes ping, and it may be that you're pushing to something that you're not quite ready for yet, and we've all been there, haven't we? You've been getting through some injuries recently. I've had a multitude of things in the past where I've just wanted to go a bit too hard and fast too soon, and it's found me out. The strength wasn't there, the stability wasn't there, the mobility wasn't there. It wasn't because there was a huge imbalance, it was just a bit too much for me to do at the time. But I'm sure there have been other injuries that I sustained in the past when I didn't know what I know now, that were due to imbalances. I've not always been as flexible, as mobile, as strong as I currently am, and I'm hoping that as I actually continue to progress the training and make things harder on myself, because I'm doing the right work to balance that, then I'm going to get stronger without, and actually have an even lower risk of injury long term. So for anyone listening out there, it is about creating balance and ratios and making sure that to actually live a functionally sound and injury-free life, you've got to pay the attention to the details early on, or again, as soon as you possibly can, to make sure you're not going to lay yourself up and get turned back from where you're, the progress you're currently on, as soon as possible.
Yeah. So, with that said, how do we start? We start with very, very basic exercises that target these movement groups specifically. Okay, so the basic drills and exercises that you'll be doing when you first start are going to be things like push-ups. For your push exercise, that's pretty self-explanatory, I think, and inverted rows, which are the push-up of pull exercises. They're like upside down push-ups where you're hanging under a bar and you're but in the plank position, so your legs are in front of you, and you're not like a pull-up where you're completely hanging from quite high, obviously.
So horizontal press and pull, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, my explanation was terrible.
No, I liked your explanation. I thought it was good. It gave a lot of detail. I'm just being the smart ass with the kind of streamlined version.
Thanks, man.
Yeah,
I appreciate it, genuinely. No, I do. So they're the two, basically. That is where you're going to start, and they're great because it's not just one exercise. There are variations of push-up you can do ad infinitum. And rows, although they're a bit more limited, you can still do things. You can work on one-arm rows, before you work on one-arm pull-ups, and that is the starting progression for it. Okay, pretty simple, really, I think, with those two. And so the next stage after those, because undoubtedly a lot of you aren't going to struggle with push-ups or inverted rows, what you're going to be doing is moving on to dips and pull-ups. And when you're doing any of these 4 exercises, it's very, very important to maintain a good movement and maintain good range of motion. Yeah, you've got to go from the top all the way fully extended, arms straight, to right down to the ground with your push-up, like get your chest right down there, with your back nice and straight, don't dip or sag anywhere, and then return to that position. It's the same with the rows. You start fully extended, pull right up to the bar, so your chest's right there, elbows nicely behind you, and then you come all the way back down, and then finally disengage your shoulders. If you're not doing that, then you're not getting the benefit, the full benefit of these movements. You're not working every muscle to its max, and you're not working your joints and your mobility in the same way by staying too stiff as you would if you moved. And I say move so many times, and I'm sorry for that, but it's so important that you're thinking about the movement and not just going 20. Yeah, it's not about that. It's not about that. It's not about how fast you can do it. It's about keeping it nice and slow. And I don't mean slow. I mean just maintaining a good pace, steady and controlled, but so that you're feeling each movement. That means the up and the down of the movement. It's not just up or push or pull. It's pull and return. It's lower and push. There's 2 parts of the movement, and you need to be doing both parts. Make sure you're working both parts, and you get it's 2 reps. You know what I mean? Compared to someone who's doing 20, yeah, you're getting a much greater benefit from that than the other guy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's trying to go for quality over quantity, isn't it? I mean, quantity can come in time, but I'd rather, with anyone that I'm coaching, I'd rather do far less in terms of number of repetitions, far less quantity, and really focusing on the quality. Make sure that people understand what they're doing, understand the nature of the movement. Don't just say, do this move because it'll build your chest. Understand what's going on, feel the muscles in your body, feel the joints that are moving, feel the entire experience of it, because that builds a really strong neural connection as well, which is immensely powerful for when it comes to developing coordination and long-term strength around any particular movement pattern. So really think into what you're actually doing, slow things down. It doesn't have to be crazy slow. You can do tempo stuff as a variable. You can do slower based movements to build strength, so less reps and just more time under tension. But in the early stages of anything, if you're starting out from scratch, and I imagine if you're listening to this, there's a good chance you're not necessarily a complete beginner to training, but it's really good to understand the fundamentals, like any sort of discipline. For example, I do martial arts. We always go back to our basic forms, because everything is built from that foundation. So if you can't do basic form 1, really, really well, almost with your eyes closed, with complete and utter coordination, feeling the whole thing, then everything else above that is kind of superfluous, because you're not really getting your stances correct. You're not feeling every movement the way you should be. It's always good to regress back every now and then to kind of tune back into what you're doing. So even if you're an experienced lifter, experienced gymnast, calisthenics guy, bodyweight expert, whatever you want to be, then as long as you're taking the time to, when you're still doing your press-ups, your really basic drills, you're still feeling into the movement, because there may be something else there that you've not quite learned yet, something else you've not quite attuned to. Your body's always developing, it's always evolving, it's always growing, and it's always good to kind of keep, if nothing else, solidifying those connections all the time, really kind of building that deep neural pathway through everything that you're doing to make sure you're kind of fully attuned at all times.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even if you're not necessarily, like your muscles aren't growing from doing a rep like a push-up, then it doesn't mean that there isn't a benefit in doing it, because it's still working, your mobility is still putting stress on your joints, and it's still, like I say, building this connection, which is so important, and it takes a lot longer to build up your neural connection than it does just to build a bit of size, or even your joints, you know what I mean? It takes even longer than repairing your joint tissue compared to muscles. So your muscles will grow a lot faster than you're going to be able to build coordination and stuff, but that skill is specifically transfers onto our next movement type, the isometrics, our hold exercises. Yeah, so if you don't have a good degree of control and coordination of your body, you're going to really struggle when it comes to holding your body in space completely solid, especially when you need to breathe as well. But we won't talk about that right now. Isometric exercises are literally just holding yourself in that position. So you got things like an LSIT and or a hang in L, which is easier. You can do isometrics where you hold just the top of a push-up, or the bottom of a push-up, or the top of a pull-up, or something like that. But there are plenty of specific skills with calisthenics that you can do for isometric training, and most of them come from variations of harder exercises that you're just using as a form of progression to build up to levers or other power moves and stuff. So it's really important not just to think about these push and pull, but to work on your holds as well. Yeah, because that will have the added benefit of massively boosting this mind-muscle connection, this neural connection to your muscles, making you super strong for a start, but also giving you a much greater degree of control over individual parts of your body, because you can't avoid feeling them when you're holding them and shaking like a shaky thing.
Yeah, well, like we were talking about before we actually started recording today, I've started integrating LSIT Pull Ups into my program this month, and it's something I've only very much paid lip service to in the past, the odd kind of rep here and there just to test them out. And I did some more serious work with them yesterday, 4 sets of failure. And essentially LSIT pull up, for those of you that don't know what I mean, is essentially performing a pull up, a vertical pull with your legs up in front of you in a straight line. So essentially you're in an L position and you're performing the pull up through while maintaining that position. And first and foremost, my abs were, and what they were at the time, screaming at me. My deeper core muscles were really kind of fired up as a result of having to hold my legs out. My thighs and hamstrings and everything were kind of starting to really scream at me by the end, because I was keeping my legs out straight in front of me, which is a huge challenge. And I was feeling so much going on in that, much more than beyond just a normal pull-up. Obviously if you're starting out with pull-ups for the first time, you're going to feel a lot of different things going on as new muscles, or muscles that are already there, but ones you haven't used that much before, whether to stabilize or to actually concentrically or eccentrically contract to move you through. You're going to feel new things going on, and that's great. And it's why it's always good to progress and try different things and test yourselves in different ways, because yesterday, my God, my whole body was talking to me. Well, it was shouting at me rather loud and profusely, but it was having its say, and it was great. It was fantastic, because just learning to move while holding isometrically in certain positions as well. It was a real education in just what my body is capable of, but also what it's not quite capable of yet, but also where it can go in time. And before we move on, I'll just carry on this sort of isometric stuff. Do you mind if we just regress back a little bit to the press and pull stuff? Because there were just a couple of things I wanted to comment on before we got too far into the other stuff. Is that cool?
Yeah, no. I think to be honest with you, there's not much more to be said for isometrics. It's compared to the movements, this is almost like it can be considered as like a throwaway thing, because you're going to be if you're not holding your body tight and you're not doing exercises for holds really, like you're going to be doing them in the rep in one way or another. But it's important just to know about these isometrics, so that when we refer to them later, because we definitely will, people know what we're talking about and people can apply it to their own. But yeah, circle back round, pushing and pulling. These are the actual movements, obviously, as opposed to holding, which is debatable. I call it movement still, because I feel it is, even though you know what I'm saying.
Well, yeah, it's still part of the full spectrum of human activity. Holding a position, is just as intense, if not more intense in a lot of cases, than actually actively dynamically moving. It still has relevance. So it's part of it. Like we say, we can break movement down very simplistically to 3 components. We have concentric contraction, isometric contraction, and eccentric contraction. So concentric contraction is the more sort of active part of a movement. So for example, in a press up, your concentric contraction would be the push up, as the muscles you're directly targeting, triceps, chest, deltoids, anterior deltoids specifically, are concentrically contracting. They're actively contracting to push force away from the body, to push you up off the floor. An isometric position would, as we've just said, explain the position that you're holding at the bottom. So when you get down into the press, if you just pause there for a second, 2, 3, however many seconds you like, just holding, as all those muscles are counterbalancing. The muscles at the back of your body, the muscles at the front of the body are just holding together in a really strong balanced ratio to kind of just hold you into that position. So there's a lot going on there very, very actively, and hence why it's obviously that much more challenging, because a lot of muscle and a lot of neural activity is being fired up in that moment. And then the eccentric part of a press up position or press up movement would be the lowering phase. So it's as the muscles that would normally push you back off the floor start to relax, start to ease a little bit, and the other muscles around, so your biceps, your back muscles, posterior deltoids, are starting to actually actively contract and tighten just that little bit as the concentric, more what we call agonist movers. So you have agonists and antagonists. I'll get into that another point, but essentially those muscles are tightening to just lower you to the floor effectively. So always remember that concentric, eccentric, and isometric. So those are kind of the primary contractions going on in the body through any given activity. So yes, isometrics is obviously a very important part of movement. Hopefully that explains that in a bit more of a scientific way. Going back to the press pull stuff, in terms of whether you're a beginner or not, it's always good to understand, that obviously a horizontal press, a horizontal pull, is always going to be easier than a vertical press or a vertical pull. As soon as the hands or the position moves further away from the center of the body, so pushing yourself off the floor as opposed in a horizontal position, so you're laying practically parallel to the floor, versus doing a handstand press up where you're completely vertical, obviously that's going to be that much harder. So, and any gradient within that where your legs come higher up and obviously the angle of the body changes to become a more vertical position is going to be tougher. Likewise, if you want to regress a pressing movement or a pulling movement, you start to elevate the hands higher up. So in a press up position, if you wanted to make them easier, or you wanted to focus in more on technique rather than on intensity, then put the hands higher up. Do a press off a box, off a table, off a window ledge. Something that's going to allow you to really focus in on the technique. Think about your postural position, because that's something where people get quite messed up in press ups. They start to kind of almost snake up off the floor. It becomes like a cobra position in yoga, where you start to lift the chest, but the core muscles of the hips.
Your bum stays the same place.
Exactly, your bum stays on the floor. And I've seen that recently with the press up challenge that's been going around that both you and I have done. You see people doing these press ups, and you almost want to kind of scream through the screen at them, lift your bum, stick your ass up in the air, because while to you it may feel like you're really poking your bum up in the air, and you kind of almost like a downward dog position, with your bum up in a very sort of upside down V shape. Actually, you'll be neutral, because what feels normal, what feels quite neutral to you, is actually sagging down quite a lot, where you don't quite have the core strength or the core endurance in particular there to see you all the way through the movement effectively without arching. And obviously that's going to compress a lot around your lower back, make your lower spine, lower back muscles very tight and very painful and uncomfortable in time. And it's also going to change the dynamic of the movement through the shoulders. So just be conscious of that. And if you find yourself, it's always a good idea. What I do a lot of the time when I'm training on my own is I film myself doing things. So I've always got that point of reference back, so I can check that I'm doing things correctly. And I do think you don't have to do it for every set, every rep, but it's also valuable, I think, from time to time, especially when you're getting to the latter stage of the exercise, i.e. the last few sets or the last few reps of something, to kind of really hone in and see, what is my body doing when it's tired? What is it doing when it's fatiguing? And just get that feedback loop constantly going, so you're always trying to assess and become your own coach over time. So yeah, always think with the press up, look at technique, bring the hands up that little bit higher. Likewise with the pulling work, as Reece said, you can do single arm work on the horizontal pull, on the TRX, on the inverted rows, laying underneath a bar, pulling your chest up to it to help progress yourself up to doing the vertical pulls, and obviously focusing on range of motion at all time. The other thing we talked about was the dips. You know, dips are something that's so important. You know, all of this is important to have a good, strong mobility practice based around them. You know, make sure you're warming up the shoulders appropriately, warming up the spine, getting yourself fully prepped for the movement. But dips more than anything else, because of the extension of the shoulder, you know, because the way your elbows are driving back up behind you and you're really stretching out of the front of the shoulder, you know, that's something that you really need to work on with your mobilization. So even something as simple as standing with a broom or just any sort of stick behind your back with your hands almost in a position as if they were going to curl up into a bicep curl and bring the weight forward, but obviously the bar is behind you, it's behind your bum, so you're not going to be able to do that. Try and lift your arms up behind you, okay? So you're going to start to feel that stretch and extension through the shoulder very actively. And if you can't bring that up pretty much to parallel, i.e. about a 90-degree angle behind you without having to lean your body forward excessively, there's a good argument to say that you shouldn't be doing dips. If you don't have that strength and that flexibility to extend the shoulder just by lifting a broom handle up behind you with straight arms, and obviously coping with that stretch without having to massively compensate by leaning forward, then when you go into a loaded position like a dip, where you're putting all your body weight, all the tension of that through the front of the shoulder, then, as I say, there's a good call to say you should probably back off. You know, if you don't have the movement, if you don't have the mobilization, the mobility capacity there, then there's a good chance that it's going to go wrong when you start to load more pressure, more intensity onto the movement itself. So just be conscious of that. Sound fair?
Yeah, but the one good thing is you can stretch for that as well. It's not like, oh, I can't lift my hands very much, that's it, I'll never be able to do dips. It's not the case. Your mobility and flexibility can improve always. So an easy way to do a stretch like that would be to, if you have like a little bar or something, or some railings around the gym or around your home or around down the park or anything, you can just put your hands on there in a standard position, so they're like kind of by your hips or just behind your back, and then you slowly lower yourself to the ground with your arms straight, and that'll just slowly bring those shoulders back in that position. And it doesn't matter if your back will round up a bit and as you get right down into the squat, but that'll help you build that mobility as well. So a combination of doing that stretch and flexibility exercise with push-ups will help you build up the strength in that and the range of motion to then progress onto dips. And when you're working that flexibility as well, another great thing you can do, if you have the strength there already, is not say, I can't do dips until I can do this, but it's just to, once you have a degree of that mobility, you can start doing very small movement reps of the dip. So you start at the top and you come down less than 90 degrees, but just slowly working that. So you're working your scapula stabilizers, you're working all your shoulder muscles and your chest, and you're just getting used to that movement. So as your mobility increases and your strength increases, you'll be able to get lower and lower and lower until you can touch your hands with your shoulders, and then you can do some pretty cool dips.
Yeah, and there's always, you know, dips likewise with pull-ups. You know, as Reese has said, we don't want to say that you shouldn't try something if you're feeling like you want to give it a go. You know, there is an argument always that, you know, at some degree of partial range movement, just to get used to, you know, holding yourself off the floor in a particular position, whether it's, you know, up against a bar for a pull-up or, you know, off a frame for some dips. You know, there are other means by which to do that. So, for example, you can do negatives. So, you know, a great thing there, you know, is essentially really focusing on what we talked about before, the eccentric contraction. So with a pull-up, that would be just getting yourself to the top of the bar and just lowering yourself down very, very slowly. You know, so just getting used to being able to hold your body off the floor for an extended period of time through a particular movement. You haven't got to go for the pull back up. Just step yourself up onto a bench, jump to the top of the bar, and then lower back down again. Likewise with dips, you know, get yourself to the top of the movement, slowly lower yourself down. If you start to feel at any point that you're going to lose the position or there's any sort of undue pain in the shoulder, then just put your feet back on the frame, you know, out to the side, wherever it is that, you know, you started your feet from.
Step down.
Yeah, exactly. Step down, you know, just relax out, but just get used to lowering. So negatives are a great way of developing strength through particularly complex or, you know, slightly more advanced movement patterns. And again, you can use that with pull, you know, horizontal pulls and presses. Tends to be less necessity to do it. And equally with the pulls and the dips, you can use bands as well. You know, use lifting bands, power bands, and you know, strap them around the equipment. So you're basically resting your knee into a band, either hanging from the top of a frame for pull-ups, or maybe just across some bars either side of the dip bar. So you're just kneeling on something that's actually helping you with the resistance. So it's going to help you to push back up, just remove some of the pressure initially through the shoulders, and you can go for lighter bands progressively over time. And if you don't know what we mean by bands or what that sort of looks like, if you've never heard of that idea before, then feel free to reach out to us. We'll give you some more information about how to get in touch at the end of the episode, and I'll happily point you in the right direction for that. But yeah, I think that's most of what I wanted to say about those fundamental upper body and hold positions. Anything you want to add into the mix, or should we go on to talking a bit about leg work?
One thing just before we go on to the legs, and that's your core. And now, because the thing about your core is because it's the middle of your body, you don't really push or pull from it. So all of your core, although you'll get the back of your back, your obliques, your lats, your abs will be working all the time when you're doing pulls, dips, and isometrics. They'll always be in the mix somewhere, but they're not being concentrated on. So to work your core, there you can do things like leg raises, whether you're hanging or supporting on top of the dipping bars. You can bring your legs up into your body to then repeat your core, and it's like doing crunches, but instead of just moving your back up to your knees, what you're doing is you're levering with your hips, so you're using all of your core and your hip flexors, which is the problem with that the world has with crunches. You're just working your abs and you're basically just ruining that part of your back, and your hips aren't moving at all really. So there's a very limited mobility in there. But with the leg raises, because you're in a hanging position, it forces your whole body then to work that part, because you have no support. You're not lying down. You're not sitting down on anything. You forces all your trunk muscles to work together and properly to then build serious core strength. So hanging, supported leg raises, and another one that I love doing is we get onto hollow body work if you want, but I really just wanted to touch on this quick, are these flutter kicks, which I did mention to you earlier, Chris. Yeah. Before we hit record. And these are, you're just lying on the ground or on a bench, which I prefer, and where you just do you just raise your legs up above your hips and back down, like a 90-degree kind of core exercise. Instead, you just bringing the legs just above or holding them horizontally if you're on a bench, with your legs straight, just kicking like you would if you were in a swimming pool, and just fluttering your legs like that for time. And I tell you, that will rip your core up so much you'll be crying. And and amazing exercise for the whole of your trunk, not just getting a six-pack, because it's not all about it.
No, exactly. And in one of our previous talks on my podcast, we got into the dynamics of core musculature, and we'll continue to talk about that, longer term, over other episodes. There's so much going on around the core. It's not just abs. It really is everything from essentially the lower ribs all the way down to the top of the thighs. There's so much going on around that position. So when we talk about anything that's challenging your core, it's very much that lumbar pelvic region. It's the lower back all the way down through to your pelvis, to your pelvic floor muscles. There's a hell of a lot going on through that area. So, never neglect it, so to speak. There's always going to be a challenge to it, placed on it by any sort of really intense dynamic exercise, like a pull up, even a press up, depending on how strong you are. But obviously, as you progress through, the limiting factor in a lot of things is going to be your ability to stabilize, particularly through that area. So, core has been popularized as a term over the years now, and it's become a bit of a faddy idea, and everyone wants to have good core. But, most people don't fully understand what that really means. So, as Reese has just pointed out, it's such an essential part of your body. So much is going through that at any given time. So it's something that, you really do need to pay a lot of extra attention to over time. Every movement is essentially a core exercise, because everything is going to hit the core, but equally it's very important to do accessory work, that's going to help you to really focusing on how to optimize that, and also learn how to brace it correctly through certain movement patterns, and also to prepare for bigger moves before you actually start to attempt them, and even do some sort of active warm-up for your core muscles as well, to make sure those very strong stabilizing muscles are firing up before you even attempt anything too complex, because you've already got then the foundation. Not train them to fatigue, you don't want them to be overly tired because they're not going to then perform, but just warming them up appropriately. It's something that doesn't probably get really discussed as much when we talk about warm-ups. Everyone thinks, heat up the joints, stretch out the muscles, but stability work as part of a warm-up, that's that's huge. You know, even just doing a few press ups just to kind of get your core muscles fired up, holding your body off the floor for a few reps. You know, that can be really, really valuable when you progress up to more complex things.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's really important to work your core. And listen, we'll set up I've already got like a getting started page that goes through a lot of these exercises, which you can check out, and we'll set up a link to that or something, because I know we're just throwing a lot at you right now, but
they can take it.
Yeah. You probably know a lot of these exercises anyway. It's just good to go through them and how they work and what you're doing, so that you can apply that philosophy to other stuff you're doing as well, not just think about pull-ups and dips. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So let's move on to legs then.
Yeah. So, I mean, essentially, when it comes to body weight drills, obviously everything you do in a gym setting with some sort of external loading, like a dumbbell or a barbell, you can perform. You can do a body weight squat. You can do a bridging movement. Laying on your back, lifting your hips up off the floor. A hip hinge essentially, to try and target in on glutes and hamstrings and the posterior elements of the legs. You can lunge. You can step up. You can do a single leg deadlift, just balancing on one leg, tilting the body forward, bringing the other leg up behind you. But it's very hard to progress past a certain point with those things. So a lot of the time with leg work specifically, it does tend to require some external loading to progress on more strength. However, there are examples, and my personal favourite of a bodyweight drill this is exceptionally challenging, no matter how much you progress, because it's very hard to build the volume in over time just because of the coordination and complexity. And this is where skill and strength really start to cross over, is doing a pistol squat. So, which is essentially a single leg squat. So just going down on one leg, arse to grass, all the way to the floor, or progressively, getting used to doing it to a bench or a box or a chair, and then down to a lower level like a Reebok step, or just a lower, smaller box or stool, and then getting yourself all the way down to the floor and being able to comfortably lift yourself back up. So that's a really great example of a bodyweight leg position, which is going to hit your legs almost as hard, if not harder, than doing a very heavy loaded squat or deadlift through using both feet at the same time. And in a lot of people's cases with negligible form, we see a lot of very partial range work going on, particularly with squats. A lot of people seem to neglect the necessity of trying to get the thighs parallel or even below parallel to the floor, getting the hips lower than the knees and really driving that range of motion. So you can start off with all the other stuff, lunges, step ups, they're all great. These are all great exercises to try and challenge you. And like we said before, with the upper body stuff, you can change the tempo around, so just go slower. You can go down and hold positions as well, so step into a lunge and hold it at the bottom, just keeping your back knee ever so slightly off the floor, so you are putting all the tension through the legs. That stuff's really, really important as well. Equally with the pistol squats, holding those at the bottom before you drive back up is going to be a great way of building strength. So there is a ton of stuff you can do if you're creative with it, if you kind of play around with the volumes, play around with the intensities, play around with the time. There's a number of different ways to hit your legs without actually adding any external weight to it whatsoever. But from my perspective, I'm always going to come from a place where I like adding external load, because I find that also an equally good test as well. The point is, you can do a lot of things, regardless of what resources you have available.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think most people, when they do get to training, they do just think about squats as a leg exercise. And I think the important thing to kind of understand is that in actual movement in real life, not in the gym, the majority of force that your legs exert is pushing. You're not really doing pull movements with your legs, because you can't really grip anything to bring it in the first place. And that's not to say that your muscles can't. You've got your hamstrings, obviously, and they do work, and your hip flexors, of course, as well. But it's as a main focus, your legs are predominantly pushing, which is why there isn't much beyond like squats and lunges as basic framework exercises that you can do to train your legs. You do have like rotary exercises and ways of tweaking those basic two kind of movements, and that is limiting. I know, sorry Chris, but it is limiting. But there isn't a lot more you can do with your legs, is there? It's just the way it is.
Well, I would say in terms of balance, again, another reason why I love the pistol squat is, especially when you're starting out with it, getting yourself into a position where you can lower yourself to the floor. I mean, that is all flexion of the knee.
Yeah.
So that is all coming through the hamstrings and the glutes. That eccentric lowering phase.
Yeah. I'm not putting it to shame at all.
No. I get what you're saying. I'm just saying
the main concentration of your pistol squat is pushing back up, isn't it? It's not going down.
I mean that's the harder part of the movement, but also that's just the way the muscles are balanced. The fascic and tonic muscle balance. Those tonic muscles are the ones that are kind of at the back of the body that are going to, stay fairly strong anyway, because they're the ones that are holding you up. And maybe that's something we should have mentioned earlier. There are the muscles in your back more often than not are, you're typically able to pull, particularly, horizontally, able to pull more than you can push. Because that's just the way the body's built, because those muscles at the back are designed to be strong, because they're the ones that are holding you in an upright position all day long anyway. So so lowering tends to be more skill based in a pistol squat than it does
which just highlights the importance of doing it slowly as well.
Yes.
And what, like you say, with a pistol squat, when you first come to it, and if you already have a good range of motion in your regular squat or like a bodyweight squat, then you won't have a problem being in the bottom position of a pistol squat. But getting down to it is really hard. It takes a very, very high degree of balance and coordination. You need to have your leg out nicely in front of you. You need to put your arms out in front of you as well. And you need to keep your whole body balanced over that one foot. There's no leaning out to one side or anything. With a pistol squat, you'll literally just fall over and it'll be a total waste. It's so important. And when you do pistol squats as well, always don't think of pushing with your toes like with a normal squat. Drive in with your heels, because that is the point where the rest of your body, your rested body is going to move around, your heel. So push straight into the ground with your heel, and that's going to help a lot when it comes to maintaining balance, getting back up, as well as getting down. Like, really focus on heel position and don't be up on your toes. It's a mistake I see so many people make with pistol squats and squats in general, and it's like that's such a fundamental technique. It's really important to highlight that to you guys now. Yeah, definitely. As soon as that heel lifts off the floor, and it's more sort of mid-foot to heel. You don't have to, if you step back, obviously completely onto your heel and have your toes up off the floor, then you could be equally as you'll
at risk of falling backwards. Yeah, exactly, as you would be falling forwards if all your weight's on your toes. So try and keep an even balance. It's a good practice to try and focus on pushing your big toe and your heel into the floor, or you're pushing your toes and your heel into the floor at the same time. Yeah, it's almost like you're gripping the ground with your foot. Exactly. That's where barefoot training. That's where barefoot training can become really valuable, because you just get used to that feel of gripping with your feet, because that's as natural a human thing to do as anything. It's just a grip as we walk over things, as we move. So with the pistol squat as well, there is, I don't want you to think that you have to go straight into that. There are progressions to it, and a very simple progression to look at. Like with anything, there's always a progression. And in this case, when you're doing a step up, for example, if that's the kind of level that you're at, really focus on pulling yourself up to the top of a step up. So with your foot up on a bench or box or something in front of you, really focus on pulling yourself up, almost using your hamstrings and glutes to kind of lift you up off the floor, rather than just sort of bouncing off the back foot. Then equally, as you come back down to the floor, again, squeeze those muscles. It's the same dynamic. You're lowering yourself. So squeeze the hamstrings, squeeze the glutes, really focusing on those muscles and practice that coordination. Then from there, you can practice standing up on the box or the bench, and then very simply just lowering with one leg. Keep the other leg down to the side, but keep it straight, and try and lower yourself until you can actually touch your heel comfortably to the floor, and then drive back up off the other leg. That's when you start to build that practice. If you can't get all the way down to the floor, don't worry, just go half of the way and then get to the point where you feel comfortable. And then you can start to practice, maybe as you're squatting down, to allow you to get lower, start lifting the foot from the floor. So just bringing that leg up a little bit higher, so it starts to replicate more of a pistol squat where the leg's out in front of you at the bottom of the movement, and then just progress from there. So it's very, very straightforward. There's lots of ways of building to it, but again, it's really, all of those things are really going to help you with that skill development and that strength and balance development of lowering yourself down. And that's a great starting point as well. That is actually fantastic, because you're probably doing some form of step up anyway, or maybe you could do it on your stairs at home, or there are loads of situations where you can do that to build that initial kind of motor control and strength and trust in balance on one leg as well, because it's also kind of weird as well. If you haven't been doing anything like that in ages,
it is a bit it's a bit not confusing, but it's like it's a bit offsetting for your mind and for your brain to work out like what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. It's just that neural connection again. It's just getting everything firing up in the right order so it doesn't feel quite so wobbly. It's one of the things you'll always notice when you go from doing no training to some training. You start off a little bit shaky and all of a sudden you start to be less shaky, and then you progress and make things a bit harder and things get a bit shakier again.
Yeah.
And then you reach that level where everything starts to stabilize, and it's just, over time building that connectivity throughout the whole body, and it's just going to become much more confident, and you just feel, I can just drop to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was a time when I wouldn't even hope to do a pistol squat, and now I kind of do it almost as automatically when I sit down onto the floor. I lowered myself down on one leg.
Do you pistol out as well when you're sitting on the floor? Do you pistol out into
Yeah,
standing?
I do actually. It's funny when I'm training people, I'll demonstrate an exercise to them and that's on the floor, and I'll lower myself down off one leg and stand back up off one leg, and they're like, "Oh my God, how do you do that? Do I have to do that?" And no, it's fine. Like, we will do that, of course, if we haven't done it already, because I like to teach people that particular drill. But you do it. It's not because you're showing off and look at me, I can go up and down on one leg. It's just because it feels quite comfortable. Yeah. Likewise, a lot of the time now, if I lean forward to pick something up, because I've spent so much time doing single leg deadlifts, I tend to just hinge at the hip and just sort of bend down and pick it up off the floor without actually bending my knees.
Yeah, I do that as well. I just like fold in half and grab something off the floor.
But it's great, because that's natural. It feels normal to do that now because you've trained your body to do it. So it's amazing how quickly, and progressively over time as well. But things that would otherwise seem really freaky and alien suddenly become natural because guess what? It's actually a natural movement. It's something that's there. Your body wants to move that way. We've just forgotten how. And that kind of, I think, probably brings us full circle, really, isn't it? Over to how we started this, which is, most things, in fact, everything that we're talking about here, it's all natural movement, whether it's with a dumbbell, a barbell, or just with your body weight. It's more than lifting because it's natural human movement. We don't need to categorize it as lifting because this is fundamentally correct, functional, natural movement, and obviously that's what this show is all about.
And there is more to it than lifting as well. It is mobility, it is flexibility, it is these isometrics and these compound movements. It is there's more to it than just throwing a dumbbell around, and I think that's important to remind yourself of that as well. Because otherwise you'll get stuck in that mentality where you're constantly looking at weight size, 15 kilos, 17.5 kilos, 20 kilos, and it's that's such a limiting way of watching yourself develop, because there's so much more to it. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, how do you quantify a handstand as a weight discipline? You can't really.
No, exactly. I mean, there's tons to it. It's skill, it's strength, it's stability, it's flexibility, mobility. The good movements, the big sort of larger compound, more complex things. There's so much going on in them. It's not to dismiss simpler isometric stuff like bicep curls and things like that, because it can be complementary to bigger movements. And
and it can be fun as well. Sometimes it is nice just to do some dumbbell, a couple of weights, grab a weight and just be like, you know what, this calisthenics thing's doing me all right.
It's great. And it's a lot. It's, as long as you see that stuff as what it is, it's kind of accessory work. You want to spend 90% really of your time, 95% even, doing the complex stuff, doing the things that are going to give you the greatest gains, the most bang for your buck, give you the highest returns, be the ones that you can really measure progress on significantly. I mean, I don't think I've ever paid attention to how much I can bicep curl. Like, I couldn't tell you what I used to curl when I was a kid. I couldn't tell you what I can curl now. It's just something I'll pick up normally because it's something I'm doing at the end of a session. Very rarely, don't ever be the guy that just walks straight into the gym and starts doing bicep curls. Don't ever be that guy, because
you're better than that, man.
It's such a waste. You're just losing so much. You see it happen. They'll go on and they'll smash out their biceps and then go and try and do some pull-ups. They'll knock out like 3 or 4 pull-ups, and they're really awful form, because it's like, oh, well, lo and behold, you've pre-fatigued the weakest element of the pull-up. The smallest muscle you're using, the bicep. But
which
you
is
still need it as
the
part
start
of the movement.
for a pull as well. The biceps, that first bit that gets in, you bring your back in properly afterwards when you get your elbows behind you and you get right up to the bar. So It's like you're setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah, and look, those things can again have another part when you're injured as well. I've had times when I've had shoulder injuries and I've not been able to do any pressing or pulling compound wise, horizontally, vertically or otherwise, but I wanted to maintain some work So I've gone and done lots of isolation work with my arms, bicep curls, tricep push downs, extensions there, you know, just stuff that I know I can do to try and keep some degree of strength and coordination and neural activity going on through my upper body. You know, I just had to be patient, but I can do those things, you know, so they can work.
Yeah, but I do think it's secondary. I think it's secondary to your shoulders and your trunk and your torso, because like without your shoulders, your elbows would be completely useless, and so your arms would be completely useless. So I think your these kind of bigger joints, your hips and your shoulders, kind of come, and your whole trunk and your core come often neglected, but are much more important to your fundamental movement than your elbow or your arm lever. Do you know what I mean? That's what I mean by my elbow. I mean your biceps and your triceps and your forehand. And like, it's not about neglecting them either, but it's about not just being obsessed with your arms.
Brilliant. I think that's actually quite a good note to wrap it up on. What do you reckon? I don't know if you want to add anything into the mix, mate.
No, not really. No. We'll set up a page in the notes that has more details on all these exercises or some kind of pathway, so you can find out more information, get visual explanations, videos or images and walkthroughs of these, so you can get started with it. I've got a foundation workout which covers most of these exercises anyway as a total body workout. You can just download it off the website. Yeah, and that's about it really, mate. This is like the start of your training. You know, these are your first couple of exercises you'll start learning, you'll start working on. These are fundamentals. Whenever I do workouts, these are the exercises I'm doing for strength. I'm not doing like crazy exercises. You think this is like too basic. I do 30 pull-ups a day, 30 dips a day, 30 leg raises a day. You know, I don't think I'm above this. You're not above it. You can start now and you'll get massive benefits from doing these fundamental movements.
Cool. Okay, guys. Well, look, you know, thank you very much for joining us today. If you liked what you've heard, then please do head on over to iTunes to leave a rating and review to help other people find the show. It can be a little bit of good karma for yourself as well, and we will be very, very grateful. We won't turn up and, you know, hug you or kiss you or anything. We don't know who you are. It's all very anonymous, but thank you in advance for your support. If you would like to get involved in the show in any way, whether it's to come on and maybe have a chat with us, to share a question or get something answered by us that you'd be intrigued by, then please do feel to reach out to us via our individual websites at MoreThanLifting.com for Reese, CoachThatch.com for myself, or come and message us on social. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. It's Coach Thatch and More Than Lifting. But anyway, that will do us for today.
Yeah, that's it. Don't forget to subscribe, leave us a rating, and yeah, we'll catch up with you soon. We've got loads of new stuff coming, and we've got some great stuff actually coming over the next few episodes where we touch on endurance training, skills training,